No, no. But philosophy at 10:30 at night is somewhat late. Yet I have no other observation to make, for what you say is correct, which is more than can be said for all philosophy. My journeys became more and more extensive and more productive. Asuna took care of all, and our little fortune increased. One day, as I was setting off on an expedition, "Go," said she. "At your return, I will give you a surprise." I questioned her, but in vain. She would tell me nothing, and I departed. Our expedition lasted nearly 6 weeks. We had been to Lucca to take in oil, to Leghorn for English cottons, and we ran our cargo without opposition and returned home full of joy. When I entered the house, the first thing I beheld in the middle of Assunta's chamber was a cradle that might be called sumptuous compared with the rest of the furniture, and in it a baby 7 or 8 months old. I uttered a cry of joy. The only moment of sadness I had known since the assassination of the procurer were caused by the recollection that I had abandoned this child. For the assassination itself, I had never felt any remorse. Poor Asuna had guessed all. She had profited by my absence and furnished with a half of the linen, and having written down the day and hour at which I had deposited the child at the asylum, had set off for Paris, and had reclaimed it. No objection was raised, and the infant was given up to her. I confess, Your Excellency, when I saw this poor creature sleeping peacefully in its cradle, I felt my eyes fill with tears. "Ah, Assunta," cried I, "you are an excellent woman, and heaven will bless you." "This," said Monte Cristo, "is less correct than your philosophy. It is only faith." "Alas, Your Excellency is right," replied Bertuccio, "and God made this infant the instrument of our punishment. Never did a perverse nature declare itself more prematurely. And yet it was not owing to any fault in his bringing up. He was a most lovely child with large blue eyes of that deep color that harmonizes so well with the blonde complexion. Only his hair, which was too light, gave his face a most singular expression and added to the vivacity of his look and the malice of his smile. Unfortunately, there is a proverb which says that red is either altogether good or altogether bad. The proverb was but too correct as regarded Benedetto, and even in his infancy he manifested the worst disposition. It is true that the indulgence of his foster mother encouraged him. This child, for whom my poor sister would go to town, 5 or 6 leagues off, to purchase the earliest fruits and the most tempting sweetmeats, preferred to Palma grapes or Genoese preserves, the chestnut stolen from a neighbor's orchard, or the dried apples in his loft. We eat as well the nuts and apples that grew in my garden. One day, when Benedetto was about 5 or 6, our neighbor Wasilio, who, according to the custom of the country, never locked up his purse or his valuables, for as Your Excellency knows, there are no thieves in Corsica, complained that he had lost a louis out of his purse. We thought he must have made a mistake in counting his money, but he persisted in the accuracy of his statement. One day, Benedetto, who had been gone from the house since morning, to our great anxiety, did not return until late in the evening, dragging a monkey after him, which he said he had found chained to the foot of a tree. For more than a month past, the mischievous child, who knew not what to wish for, had taken it into his head to have a monkey. A boatman, who had passed by Rogliano, and who had several of these animals, whose tricks had greatly diverted him, had doubtless suggested this idea to him. "Monkeys are not found in our woods chained to trees," said I. "Confess how you obtained this animal." Benedetto maintained the truth of what he had said, and accompanied it with details that did more honor to his imagination than to his veracity. I became angry. He began to laugh. I threatened to strike him, and he made 2 steps backwards. "You cannot beat me," said he. "You have no right, for you are not my father." We never knew who had revealed this fatal secret, which we had so carefully concealed from him. However, it was this answer, in which the child's whole character revealed itself, that almost terrified me, and my arm fell without touching him. The boy triumphed, and this victory rendered him so audacious that all the money of Assunta, whose affection for him seemed to increase as he became more unworthy of it, was spent in caprices she knew not how to contend against, and folly she had not the courage to prevent. When I was at Rogliano, everything went on properly, but no sooner was my back turned than Benedetto became master, and everything went ill. When he was only 11, he chose as companions from among the young men of 18 or 20, the worst characters in Bastia or indeed in Corsica, and they had already, for some mischievous pranks, been several times threatened with a prosecution. I became alarmed, as any prosecution might be attended with serious consequences. I was compelled at this period to leave Corsica on an important expedition. I reflected for a long time, and with the hope of averting some impending misfortune, I resolved that Benedetto should accompany me. I hoped that the active and laborious life of the smuggler, with a severe discipline on board, would have a salutary effect on his character, which was now well nigh, if not quite corrupt. I spoke to Benedetto alone, and proposed him to accompany me, endeavoring to tempt him by all the promises most likely to dazzle the imagination of a child of 12. He heard me patiently, and when I had finished, burst out laughing. "Are you mad, uncle?" He called me by this name when he was in good humor. "Do you think I am going to change the life I lead for your mode of existence? My agreeable indolence of the hard and precarious toil you impose on yourself, exposed to the bitter frost at night, and the scorching heat by day, compelled to conceal yourself, and when you are perceived, receive a volley of bullets, all to earn a paltry sum? Why, I have as much money as I want. Mother Asuna always furnishes me when I ask for it. You see that I should be a fool to accept your offer." The arguments and his audacity perfectly stupefied me. Benedetto rejoined his associates, and I saw him from a distance point me out to them as a fool. "Sweet child," murmured Monte Cristo. "Oh, had he been my own son," replied Bertuccio, "or even my nephew, I would have brought him back to the right road. For the knowledge that you're doing your duty gives you strength, but the idea that I was striking a child whose father I had killed made it impossible for me to punish him. I gave my sister, who constantly defended the unfortunate boy, good advice, and as she confessed that she had several times missed money to a considerable amount, I showed her a safe place in which to conceal our little treasure for the future. My mind was already made up. Benedetto could read, write, and cipher perfectly. For when a fit seized him, he learned more in a day than others in a week. My intention was to enter him as a clerk in some ship, and without letting him know anything of my plan, to convey him some morning on board. By this means his future treatment would depend upon his own conduct. I set off for France, after having fixed upon the plan. Our cargo was to be landed in the Gulf of Lions, and this was a difficult thing to do, because it was in the year 1829. The most perfect tranquility was restored, and the vigilance of the custom house officers was redoubled, and their strictness was increased at this time, in consequence of the affair at Beaucaire. Our expedition made a favorable beginning. We anchored our vessel, which had a double hold, where our goods were concealed, amidst a number of other vessels that bordered the banks of the Rhone from Beaucaire to Alls. On our arrival, we began to discharge our cargo in the night and convey it into the town by the help of the innkeeper with whom we were connected. Whether success rendered us imprudent or whether we were betrayed, I know not. But one evening, about 5 o'clock, our little cabin boy came breathlessly to inform us that he had seen a detachment of custom house officers advancing in our direction. It was not their proximity that alarmed us, for detachments were constantly patrolling along the banks of the Rhone, but the care, according to the boy's account, that they took to avoid being seen. In an instant we were on the alert, but it was too late. Our vessel was surrounded, and amongst the custom house officers I observed several gendarmes, and as terrified at the sight of their uniforms as I was brave at the sight of any other, I sprang into the hold, opened a port, and dropped into the river, dived, and only rose at intervals to breathe, until I reached a ditch that had recently been made from the Rhone to the canal that runs from Beaucaire to Aigues-Mortes. I was now safe, for I could swim along the ditch without being seen, and I reached the canal in safety. I had designedly taken this direction. I have already told your excellency of an innkeeper from Nîmes who had set up a little tavern on the road from Bellegarde to Beaucaire. "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "I perfectly recollect him. I think he was your colleague." "Precisely," answered Bertuccio. But he had, 7 or 8 years before this period, sold his establishment to a tailor at Marseilles, who, having almost ruined himself in his old trade, wished to make his fortune in another. Of course, we made the same arrangements with the new landlord that we had with the old, and it was of this man that I intended to ask shelter. "What was his name?" inquired the Count, who seemed to become somewhat interested in Bertuccio's story. "Gaspard Cataris. He had married a woman from the village of Carcani, and whom we did not know by any other name than that of her village. She was suffering from malarial fever and seemed dying by inches. As for her husband, he was a strapping fellow of 40 or 45, who had more than once, in time of danger, given ample proof of his presence of mind and courage. And you say, interrupted Monte Cristo, that this took place towards the year 1829, Your Excellency. In what month? June. The beginning or the end? The evening of the 3rd. Ah, said Monte Cristo, the evening of the 3rd of June, 1829. Go on. It was from Château that I intended demanding shelter, and, as we never enter by the door that opened onto the road, I resolved not to break through the rule. So climbing over the garden hedge, I crept amongst the olive and wild fig trees, and fearing that Château might have some guest, I entered a kind of shed in which I had often passed the night, and which was only separated from the inn by a partition, in which holes had been made in order to enable us to watch an opportunity of announcing our presence. My intention was, if Château was alone, to acquaint him with my presence, finish the meal the custom-house officers had interrupted, and profit by the threatened storm to return to Rome, and ascertain the state of our vessel and its crew. I stepped into the shed, and it was fortunate I did so, for at that moment Château entered with a stranger. I waited patiently, not to overhear what they said, but because I could do nothing else. Besides, the same thing had occurred often before. The man who was with Château was evidently a stranger to the south of France. He was one of those merchants who come sell jewelry at the Beaucaire Fair, and who during the month the fair lasts, and during which there is so great an influx of merchants and customers from all parts of Europe, often have dealings to the amount of 100,000 to 150,000 francs. Château entered hastily. Then, seeing that the room was, as usual, empty and only guarded by the dog, he called to his wife. "Hello, Carcani," said he. "The worthy priest has not deceived us. The diamond is real." An exclamation of joy was heard, and the staircase creaked beneath a feeble step. "What do you say?" asked his wife, pale as death. "I say that the diamond is real, and that this gentleman, one of the first jewelers of Paris, will give us 50,000 francs for it. Only, in order to satisfy himself that it really belongs to us, he wishes you to relate to him, as I have done already, the miraculous manner in which the diamond came into our possession. In the meantime, please to sit down, monsieur, and I will fetch you some refreshment." The jeweler examined attentively the interior of the inn and the apparent poverty of the persons who were about to sell him a diamond that seemed to have come from the casket of a prince. "Relate your story, madam," said he, wishing, no doubt, to profit by the absence of the husband, so that the latter could not influence the wife's story, to see if the two recitals tallied. "Oh," returned she, "it was a gift of heaven. My husband was a great friend, in 1814 or 1815, of a sailor named Edmond Dantès. This poor fellow, whom Château had forgotten, had not forgotten him, and at his death he bequeathed this diamond to him." "But how did he obtain it?" asked the jeweler. "Had he it before he was imprisoned?" "No, monsieur, but it appears that in prison he made the acquaintance of a rich Englishman, and as in prison he fell sick, and Dantès took the same care of him as if he had been his brother. The Englishman, when he was set free, gave this stone to Dantès, who, less fortunate, died, and in his turn left it to us, and charged the excellent abbé, who was here this morning, to deliver it." "The same story," muttered the jeweler, "and improbable as it seemed at first, it may be true. There's only the price we are not agreed about." "How not agreed about?" said Château. "I thought we agreed for the price I asked." "That is," replied the jeweler, "I offered 40,000 francs." 40,000? cried La Carcani. "We will not part with it for that sum. The abbé told us it was worth 50,000 without the setting." "What was the abbé's name?" asked the indefatigable questioner. "The Abbé Busoni," said La Carcani. "He was a foreigner?" "An Italian from the neighborhood of Mantua, I believe." "Let me see this diamond again," replied the jeweler. "The first time you're often mistaken as to the value of a stone." Château took from his pocket a small case of black shagreen, opened, and gave it to the jeweler. At the sight of the diamond, which was as large as a hazelnut, La Carcani's eyes sparkled with cupidity. "And what did you think of this fine story, eavesdropper?" said Monte Cristo. "Did you credit it?" "Yes, your excellency." I did not look on Catullus as a bad man, and I thought him incapable of committing a crime or even a theft. That did more honor to your heart than to your experience. Bertuccio, had you known this Edmond Dantès, of whom they spoke? No, Your Excellency. I had never heard him before, and never but once afterwards, and that was from the Abbé Busoni himself, when I saw him in the prison at Nîmes. Go on. The jeweler took the ring, and drawing from his pocket a pair of steel pliers and a small set of copper scales, he took the stone out of its setting and weighed it carefully. I will give you 45,000, said he, but not a soul more. Besides, as that is the exact value of the stone, I brought just that sum with me. Oh, that's no matter, replied Catullus. I will go back with you to fetch the other 5,000 francs. No, returned the jeweler, giving back the diamond and the ring to Catullus. No, it is worth no more, and I am sorry I offered so much, for the stone has a flaw in it, which I had not seen. However, I will not go back on my word, and I will give 45,000. At least, replace the diamond in the ring, said La Carcani sharply. Ah, true, replied the jeweler, and he reset the stone. No matter, observed Catullus, replacing the box in his pocket. Someone else will purchase it. Yes, continued the jeweler, but someone else will not be so easy as I am, or content himself with the same story. It is not natural that a man like you should possess such a diamond. He will inform against you. You will have to find the Abbé Busoni. And abbés who give diamonds worth 2,000 louis are rare. The law would seize it and put you in prison. If at the end of 3 or 4 months you are set at liberty, the ring will be lost, or a false stone, worth 3 francs, will be given you, instead of a diamond worth 50,000 or perhaps 55,000 francs, for which you must allow that one runs considerable risk in purchasing. Catullus and his wife looked eagerly at each other. No, said Catullus, we are not rich enough to lose 5,000 francs. As you please, my dear sir, said the jeweler. I had, however, as you see, brought you the money in bright coin. And he drew from his pocket a handful of gold, and held it sparkling before the dazzled eyes of the innkeeper, and in the other hand he held a packet of banknotes. There was evidently a severe struggle in the mind of Catullus. It was plain that the small shade-green case, which he turned over and over in his hand, did not seem to him commensurate in value to the enormous sum which fascinated his gaze. He turned towards his wife. What do you think of this? He asked in a low voice. Let him have it. Let him have it, she said. If he returns the bouquet without the diamond, he will inform against us. And, as he says, who knows if we shall ever again see the Abbé Busoni? In all probability, we shall never see him. Well then, so I will, said Catullus. So you may have the diamond for 45,000 francs. But my wife wants a gold chain, and I want a pair of silver buckles. The jeweler drew from his pocket a long flat box, which contained several samples of the articles demanded. Here, he said, I am very straightforward in my dealings. Take your choice. The woman selected a gold chain worth about 5 louis, and the husband a pair of buckles, worth perhaps 15 francs. I hope you will not complain now, said the jeweler. The abbé told me it was worth 50,000 francs, muttered Catullus. Come, give it to me. What a strange fellow you are, said the jeweler, taking the diamond from his hand. I give you 45,000 francs, that is 2,500 livres of income, a fortune such as I wish I had myself, and you are not satisfied. And the 45,000 francs, inquired Catullus in a hoarse voice, where are they? Come, let us see them. Here they are, replied the jeweler, and he counted out upon the table 15,000 francs in gold and 30,000 francs in banknotes. Wait whilst I light the lamp, said La Carcani. It is growing dark, and there may be some mistake. In fact, night had come on during this conversation, and with night the storm which had been threatening for the last half hour. The thunder growled in the distance, but was apparently not heard by the jeweler, Catullus, or La Carcani, absorbed as they were all three with the demon of gain. I myself felt a strange kind of fascination at the sight of all this gold and all these banknotes. It seemed to me that I was in a dream, and, as it always happens in a dream, I felt myself riveted to the spot. Catullus counted, and again counted the gold and the notes, then handed them to his wife. who counted and counted them again in her turn. During this time, the jeweler made the diamond play and sparkle in the lamplight, and the gem threw out jets of light, which made him unmindful of those which, precursors of the storm, began to play in at the windows. "Well," inquired the jeweler, "is the cash all right?" "Yes," said Chatteris. "Give me the pocketbook, La Carcani, and find a bag somewhere." La Carcani went to a cupboard and returned with an old leathern pocketbook and a bag. From the former she took some greasy letters and put in their place the banknotes, and from the bag took 2 or 3 crowns of 6 livres each, which, in all probability, formed the entire fortune of the miserable couple. "There," said Chatteris. "And now, although you have wronged us perhaps 10,000 francs, will you have your supper with us? I invite you with good will." "Thank you," replied the jeweler. "It must be getting late, and I must return to Beaucaire. My wife will be getting uneasy." He drew out his watch and exclaimed, "More blue? Nearly 9 o'clock. Why, I shall not get back to Beaucaire before midnight. Good night, my friends. If the Abbé Busoni should by any accident return, think of me." "In another week you will have left Beaucaire," remarked Chatteris, "for the fair ends in a few days." "True, but that makes no difference. Write to me at Paris, to M. Jonas, in the Palais Royal, Arcade Pierre, number 45. I will make the journey on purpose to see him, if it is worthwhile." At this moment there was a tremendous clap of thunder, accompanied by a flash of lightning so vivid that it quite eclipsed the light of the lamp. "See here," exclaimed Chatteris. "You cannot think of going out in such weather as this." "Oh, I am not afraid of thunder," said the jeweler. "And then there are robbers," said La Carcani. "The road is never very safe during fair time." "Oh, as to the robbers," said Jonas, "here is something for them." And he drew from his pocket a pair of small pistols, loaded to the muzzle. "Here," said he, "are dogs who bark and bite at the same time. They are for the 2 first, who shall have a longing for your diamond, friend Chatteris." Chatteris and his wife again interchanged a meaning look. It seemed as though they were both inspired at the same time with some horrible thought. "Well, then, a good journey to you," said Chatteris. "Remain," said Chatteris. "You can sleep here." "Yes, do stay," added La Carcani in a tremulous voice. "We will take every care of you." "No, I must sleep at Beaucaire. So, once more, good night." Chatteris followed him slowly to the threshold. "I can see neither heaven nor earth," said the jeweler, who was outside the door. "Do I turn to the right or to the left hand?" "To the right," said Chatteris. "You cannot go wrong. The road is bordered by trees on both sides." "Good. All right," said a voice almost lost in the distance. "Close the door," said La Carcani. "I do not like open doors when it thunders." "Particularly when there is money in the house, answered Chatteris, double-locking the door. He came into the room, went to the cupboard, took out the bag and pocketbook, and both began, for the 3rd time, to count their gold and banknotes. I never saw such an expression of cupidity as the flickering lamp revealed in those 2 countenances. The woman, especially, was hideous. Her usual feverish tremulousness was intensified, her countenance had become livid, and her eyes resembled burning coals. "Why?" she inquired in a hoarse voice. "Did you invite him to sleep here tonight?" "Why?" said Chatteris with a shudder. "Why? That he might not have the trouble of returning to Beaucaire." "Ah," responded the woman, with an expression impossible to describe. "I thought it was for something else." Woman, why do you have such ideas?" cried Chatteris. "Or if you have them, why don't you keep them to yourself?" "Well," said La Carcani, after a moment's pause, "you are not a man." "What do you mean?" added Chatteris. "If you had been a man, you would not have let him go from here." "Woman, or else he should not have reached Beaucaire." "Woman, the road takes a turn. He is obliged to follow it, while alongside of the canal there is a shorter road." "Woman, you offend the good God. There, listen." And at this moment there was a tremendous peal of thunder, while the livid lightning illumined the room, and the thunder, rolling away in the distance, seemed to withdraw unwillingly from the cursed abode. "Mercy!" said Chatteris, crossing himself. At the same moment, And in the midst of the terrifying silence which usually follows a clap of thunder, they heard a knocking at the door. Chatteris and his wife started and looked aghast at each other. "Who's there?" cried Chatteris, rising and drawing up in a heap of gold and notes scattered over the table, and which he covered with his 2 hands. "It is I," shouted a voice. "And who are you?" "Pardieu?" "Jonas, the jeweler." "Well, and you said I offend the good God," said La Carcani with a horrid smile. "Why, the good God sends him back again." Chatteris sank pale and breathless into his chair. La Carcani, on the contrary, rose and going a firm step towards the door, opened it, saying, as she did so, "Come in, dear M. Jonas." "My FOI," said the jeweler, drenched with rain. "I am not destined to return to Beaucaire tonight. The shortest follies are best, my dear Chatteris. You offer me hospitality, and I accept it, and have returned to sleep beneath your friendly roof." Chatteris stammered out something, while he wiped away the sweat that started his brow. La Carcani double-locked the door behind the jeweler. Chapter 45. The Rain of Blood. As the jeweler returned to the apartment, he cast around him a scrutinizing glance, but there was nothing to excite suspicion, if it did not exist, or confirm it, if it were already awakened. Chatteris' hand still grasped the gold and banknotes, and La Carcani called up her sweetest smiles while welcoming the reappearance of their guest. "Well, well," said the jeweler. "You seem, my good friends, to have had some fears respecting the accuracy of your money, by counting it over so carefully directly I was gone." "Oh, no," answered Chatteris. "That was not my reason, I can assure you, but the circumstances by which we have become possessed of this wealth are so unexpected as to make us scarcely credit our good fortune, and it is only by placing the actual proof of our riches before our eyes that we can persuade ourselves that the whole affair is not a dream." The jeweler smiled. "Have you any other guests in your house?" inquired he. "Nobody but ourselves," replied Chatteris. "The fact is, we do not lodge travelers. Indeed, our tavern is so near the town that nobody would think of stopping here." "Then I am afraid I shall very much inconvenience you." "Inconvenience us?" "Not at all, my dear sir," said La Carcani in her most gracious manner. "Not at all, I assure you. But where will you manage to stow me?" "In the chamber overhead." "Surely that is where you yourself sleep?" "Never mind that. We have a second bed in the adjoining room." Chatteris stared at his wife with much astonishment. The jeweler, meanwhile, was humming a song as he stood warming his back at the fire La Carcani had kindled to dry the wet garments of her guest. And this done, she next occupied herself in arranging his supper by spreading a napkin at the end of the table and placing on it the slender remains of their dinner, to which she added 3 or 4 fresh-laid eggs. Chatteris had once more parted with his treasure. The banknotes were replaced in the pocketbook, the gold put back into the bag, and the whole carefully locked in the cupboard. He then began pacing the room with a pensive and gloomy air, glancing from time to time at the jeweler, who stood reeking with the steam from his wet clothes and merely changing his place on the warm hearth, to enable the whole of his garments to be dried. "There," said La Carcani, as she placed a bottle of wine on the table. "Supper is ready whenever you are." "And you?" asked Jonas. "I don't want any supper," said Chatteris. "We dine so very late," hastily interposed La Carcani. "Then it seems I am to eat alone," remarked the jeweler. "Oh, we shall have the pleasure of waiting upon you," answered La Carcani, with an eager attention she was not accustomed to manifest even to guests who paid for what they took. From time to time Chatteris darted on his wife keen, searching glances, but rapid as the lightning flash. The storm still continued. "There, there," said La Carcani. "Do you hear that? Upon my word, you did well to come back." "Nevertheless," replied the jeweler, "if by the time I have finished my sup of the tempest has it all abated, I shall make another start." "It's the Mistral," said Chatteris, "and it will be sure to last till tomorrow morning." He sighed heavily. "Well," said the jeweler, as he placed himself at table, "all I can say is, so much the worse for those who are abroad." "Yes," chimed in La Carcani, "they will have a wretched night of it." The jeweler began eating his supper, and the woman, who was ordinarily so querulous and indifferent to all who approached her, was suddenly transformed into the most smiling and attentive hostess. Had the unhappy man on whom she lavished her assiduities been previously acquainted with her, so sudden an alteration might well have excited suspicion in his mind, or at least have greatly astonished him. Chatterus, meanwhile, continued to pace the room in gloomy silence, sedulously avoiding the sight of his guests. But as soon as the stranger had completed his repast, the agitated innkeeper went eagerly to the door and opened it. "I believe the storm is over," said he, but as if to contradict his statement. At that instant, a violent clap of thunder seemed to shake the house to its very foundation, while a sudden gust of wind, mingled with rain, extinguished the lamp he held in his hand. Trembling and awestruck, Chatterus hastily shut the door and returned to his guest, while La Carcani lighted a candle by the smoldering ashes that glimmered on the hearth. "You must be tired," said she to the jeweler. "I have spread a pair of white sheets on your bed. Go up when you are ready and sleep well." Jonas stayed for a while to see whether the storm seemed to abate in its fury, but brief space of time sufficed to assure him that, instead of diminishing, the violence of the rain and thunder momentarily increased. Resigning himself, therefore, to what seemed inevitable, he bade his host good night and mounted the stairs. He passed over my head, and I heard the flooring creak beneath his footsteps. The quick, eager glance of La Carcani followed him as he ascended, while Chatterus, on the contrary, turned his back and seemed most anxiously to avoid even glancing at him. All these circumstances did not strike me as painful at the time as they have since done. In fact, all that happened, with the exception of the story of the diamond, which certainly did wear an air of improbability, appeared natural enough and called for neither apprehension nor mistrust. But, worn out as I was with fatigue, and fully purposing to proceed onwards directly the tempest abated, I determined to obtain a few hours' sleep. Overhead I could accurately distinguish every movement of the jeweler, who, after making the best arrangements in his power for passing a comfortable night, threw himself on his bed, and I could hear it creak and groan beneath his weight. Insensibly my eyelids grew heavy. Deep sleep stole over me, and having no suspicion of anything wrong, I sought not to shake it off. I looked into the kitchen once more and saw Chatterus sitting by the side of a long table upon one of the low wooden stools which in country places are frequently used instead of chairs. His back was turned toward me, so that I could not see the expression of his countenance. Neither should I have been able to do so had he been placed differently, as his head was buried between his two hands. La Carcani continued to gaze on him for some time, then shrugging her shoulders, she took her seat immediately opposite to him. At this moment, the expiring embers threw up a fresh flame from the kindling of a piece of wood that lay near, and a bright light flashed over the room. La Carcani still kept her eyes fixed on her husband, but as he made no sign of changing his position, she extended her hard, bony hand and touched him on the forehead. Chatterus shuddered. The woman's lips seemed to move, as though she were talking, but because she merely spoke in an undertone or my senses were dulled by sleep, I did not catch a word she uttered. Confused sights and sounds seemed to float before me, and gradually I fell into a deep, heavy slumber. How long I had been in this unconscious state, I know not, when I was suddenly aroused by the report of a pistol, followed by a fearful cry. Weak and tottering footsteps resounded across the chamber above me, and the next instant a dull, heavy weight seemed to fall powerless on the staircase. I had not yet fully recovered consciousness, when again I heard groans, mingled with half-stifled cries, as if from persons engaged in a deadly struggle. A cry more prolonged than the others, and ending in a series of groans, effectually roused me from my drowsy lethargy. Hastily raising myself on one arm, I looked around, but all was dark, and it seemed to me as if the rain must have penetrated to the floor of the room above, for some kind of moisture appeared to fall, drop by drop, upon my forehead, and when I passed my hand across my brow, I felt that it was wet and clammy. To the fearful noises that had awakened me had succeeded the most perfect silence, unbroken, save by the footsteps of a man walking about in the chamber above. The staircase creaked. He descended into the room below, approached the fire, and lit a candle. The man was Chatterus. He was pale, and his shirt was all bloody. Having obtained the light, he hurried upstairs again, and once more I heard his rapid and uneasy footsteps. A moment later he came down again, holding in his hand the small shagreen case, which he opened to assure himself it contained the diamond, seemed to hesitate as to which pocket he should put it in, then, as if dissatisfied with the security of either pocket, he deposited it in his red handkerchief, which he carefully rolled round his head. After this, he took from his cupboard the banknotes and gold he had put there, thrust the one into the pocket of his trousers, and the other into that of his waistcoat, hastily tied up a small bundle of linen, and rushing toward the door, disappeared in the darkness of the night. Then all became clear and manifest to me, and I reproached myself of what had happened, as though I myself had done the guilty deed. I fancied that I still heard faint moans, and imagining that the unfortunate jeweler might not be quite dead, I determined to go to his relief, by way of atoning in some slight degree, not for crime I had committed, but for that which I had not endeavored to prevent. For this purpose I applied all the strength I possessed to force an entrance from the cramped spot in which I lay to the adjoining room. The poorly fastened boards which alone divided me from it yielded to my efforts, and I found myself in the house. Hastily snatching up the lighted candle, I hurried to the staircase. About midway a body was lying quite across the stairs. It was that of La Carcani. The pistol I had heard had doubtless been fired at her. The shot had frightfully lacerated her throat, leaving 2 gaping wounds from which, as well as the mouth, the blood was pouring in floods. She was stone dead. I strode past her and ascended to the sleeping chamber, which presented an appearance of the wildest disorder. The furniture had been knocked over in the deadly struggle that had taken place there, and the sheets, to which the unfortunate jeweler had doubtless clung, were dragged across the room. The murdered man lay on the floor, his head leaning against the wall, and about him was a pool of blood which poured forth from 3 large wounds in his breast. There was a 4th gash, in which a long table knife was plunged up to the handle. I stumbled over some object. I stooped to examine. It was a 2nd pistol, which had not gone off, probably from the powder being wet. I approached the jeweler, who was not quite dead, and at the sound of my footsteps and the creaking of the floor, he opened his eyes, fixed them on me with an anxious and inquiring gaze, moved his lips as though trying to speak, then, overcome by the effort, fell back and expired. This appalling sight almost bereft me of my senses, and finding that I could no longer be of service to anyone in the house, my only desire was to fly. I rushed towards the staircase, clutching my hair and uttering a groan of horror. Upon reaching the room below, I found 5 or 6 custom-house officers and 2 or 3 gendarmes, all heavily armed. They threw themselves upon me. I made no resistance. I was no longer master of my senses. When I strove to speak, a few inarticulate sounds alone escaped my lips. As I noticed the significant manner in which the whole party pointed to my blood-stained garments, I involuntarily surveyed myself, and then I discovered that the thick warm drops that had so bedewed me as I lay beneath the staircase must have been the blood of La Carcani. I pointed to the spot where I had concealed myself. "What does he mean?" asked the gendarme. One of the officers went to the place I directed. "He means," replied the man upon his return, "that he got in that way, and he showed the hole I had made when I broke through. Then I saw that they took me for the assassin. I recovered force and energy enough to free myself from the hands of those who held me, while I managed to stammer forth, 'I did not do it. Indeed, I did not.' A couple of gendarmes held the muzzles of their carbines against my breast. 'Stir but a step,' said they, 'and you are a dead man. Why should you threaten me with death?' cried I, 'when I have already declared my innocence.' 'Tush, tush,' cried the men. 'Keep your innocent stories to tell to the judge at Nîmes. Meanwhile, come along with us, and the best advice we can give you is to do so unresistingly.' Alas, resistance was far from my thoughts. I was utterly overpowered by surprise and terror, and without a word I suffered myself to be handcuffed and tied to a horse's tail, and thus they took me to Nîmes. I had been tracked by a customs officer, who had lost sight of me near the tavern. Feeling certain that I intended to pass the night there, he had returned to summon his comrades, who just arrived in time to hear the report of the pistol, and to take me in the midst of such circumstantial proofs of my guilt as rendered all hopes of proving my innocence utterly futile. One only chance was left me, that of beseeching the magistrate before whom I was taken to cause every inquiry to be made for the Abbé Busoni, who had stopped at the inn of the Pont du Gard on that morning. If Catullus had invented the story relative to the diamond, and there existed no such person as the Abbé Busoni, then, indeed, I was lost past redemption, or at least, my life hung upon the feeble chance of Catullus himself being apprehended and confessing the whole truth. 2 months passed away in hopeless expectation on my part, while I must do the magistrate the justice to say that he used every means to obtain information of the person I declare could exculpate me if he would. Cador still evaded all pursuit, and I had resigned myself to what seemed my inevitable fate. My trial was to come on at the approaching assizes, when, on the 8th of September, that is to say, precisely 3 months and 5 days after the events which had periled my life, the Abbé Busoni, whom I never ventured to believe I should see, presented himself at the prison doors, saying he understood one of the prisoners wished to speak to him. He added that having learned at Marseilles the particulars of my imprisonment, he hastened to comply with my desire. You may easily imagine with what eagerness I welcomed him, and how minutely I related the whole of what I had seen and heard. I felt some degree of nervousness as I entered upon the history of the diamond, but, to my inexpressible astonishment, he confirmed it in every particular, and to my equal surprise, he seemed to place entire belief in all I said. And then it was that, won by his mild charity, seeing that he was acquainted with all the habits and customs of my own country, and considering also that pardon for the only crime of which I was really guilty might come with a double power from lips so benevolent and kind, I besought him to receive my confession, under the seal which I recounted the awful affair in all its details, as well as every other transaction of my life. That which I had done by the impulse of my best feelings produced the same effect as though it had been the result of calculation. My voluntary confession of the assassination at Château proved to him that I had not committed that of which I stood accused. When he quitted me, he bade me be of good courage, and to rely upon his doing all in his power to convince my judges of my innocence. I had speedy proofs that the excellent abbé was engaged in my behalf, for the rigors of my imprisonment were alleviated by many trifling though acceptable indulgences, and I was told that my trial was to be postponed to the assizes following those now being held. In the interim, it pleased Providence to cause the apprehension of Cadorus, who was discovered in some distant country, and brought back to France, where he made a full confession, refusing to make the fact of his wife's having suggested and arranged the murder any excuse for his own guilt. The wretched man was sentenced to the galleys for life, and I was immediately set at liberty. And then it was, I presume, said Monte Cristo, that you came to me as the bearer of a letter from the Abbé Busoni? It was, Your Excellency. The benevolent abbé took an evident interest in all that concerned me. Your mode of life as a smuggler, said he to me one day, will be the ruin of you. If you get out, don't take it up again. But how, inquired I, am I to maintain myself and my poor sister? A person whose confessor I am, replied he, and who entertains a high regard for me, applied to me a short time since to procure him a confidential servant. Would you like such a post? If so, I will give you a letter of introduction to him. Oh, father, I exclaimed, you are very good. But you must swear solemnly that I shall never have reason to repent my recommendation. I extended my hand and was about to pledge myself by any promise he would dictate. But he stopped me. It is unnecessary for you to bind yourself by any vow, said he. I know and admire the Corsican nature too well to fear you. Here, take this. Continued he, after rapidly writing the few lines I brought to your excellency, and upon receipt of which you deigned to receive me into your service. And proudly, I ask whether your excellency has ever had cause to repent having done so. No, replied the count. I take pleasure in saying that you have served me faithfully, Bertuccio, but you might have shown more confidence in me. I, your excellency? Yes, you. How comes it that having both a sister and an adopted son, you have never spoken to me of either? Alas, I have still to recount the most distressing period of my life. Anxious, as you may suppose, I was to behold and comfort my dear sister. I lost no time in hastening to Corsica. But when I arrived at Rogliano, I found a house of mourning, the consequences of a scene so horrible that the neighbors remember and speak of it to this day. Acting by my advice, my poor sister had refused to comply with the unreasonable demands of Benedetto, who was continually tormenting her for money, as long as he believed there was a soul left in her possession. One morning he threatened her with the severest consequences if she did not supply him with what he desired, and disappeared and remained away all day, leaving the kind-hearted Asuna, who loved him as if he were her own child, to weep over his conduct and bewail his absence. Evening came, and still, with all the patient solicitude of a mother, she watched for his return. As the 11th hour struck, He entered with a swaggering air, attended by two of the most dissolute and reckless of his boon companions. She stretched out her arms to him, but they seized hold of her, and one of the three, none other than the accursed Benedetto, exclaimed, "Put her to torture, and she'll soon tell us where her money is." It unfortunately happened that our neighbor, Wasilio, was at Bastia, leaving no person in his house but his wife. No human creature beside could hear or see anything that took place within our dwelling. Two held poor Assunta, who, unable to conceive that any harm was intended to her, smiled in the face of those who were soon to become her executioners. The third proceeded to barricade the doors and windows, then returned, and the three united in stifling the cries of terror incited by the sight of these preparations, and then dragged Assunta feet foremost toward the brazier, expecting to wring from her an avowal where her supposed treasure was secreted. In the struggle her clothes caught fire, and they were obliged to let go their hold in order to preserve themselves from sharing the same fate. Covered with flames, Assunta rushed wildly to the door, but it was fastened. She flew to windows, but they were also secured. Then the neighbors heard frightful shrieks. It was Assunta calling for help. The cries died away in groans, and next morning, as soon as Wasilio's wife could muster up courage to venture abroad, she caused the door of our dwelling to be opened by the public authorities, when Assunta, although dreadfully burnt, was found still breathing. Every drawer and closet in the house had been forced open and the money stolen. Benedetto never again appeared at Rogliano. Neither have I since that day either seen or heard anything concerning him. It was subsequently to these dreadful events that I waited on your Excellency, to whom it would have been folly to have mentioned Benedetto, since all trace of him seemed entirely lost, or my sister, since she was dead. And in what light did you view the occurrence? Inquired Monte Cristo. As a punishment for the crime I had committed, answered Bertuccio. Oh, those Villeforts are an accursed race. Truly they are, murmured the Count in a lugubrious tone. And now, resumed Bertuccio, your Excellency may, perhaps, be able to comprehend that this place, which I revisit for the first time, this garden, the actual scene of my crime, must have given rise to reflections of no very agreeable nature, and produced that gloom and depression of spirits which excited the notice of your Excellency, who was pleased to express a desire to know the cause. At this instant a shudder passes over me as I reflect that possibly I am now standing on the very grave in which lies M. de Villefort, by whose hand the ground was dug to receive the corpse of his child. Everything is possible, said Monte Cristo, rising from the bench on which he had been sitting. Even, he added in an inaudible voice, even that the procureur be not dead. The Abbé Busoni did right to send you to me, he went on in his ordinary tone, and you have done well in relating to me the whole of your history, as will prevent my forming any erroneous opinions concerning you in future. As for that Benedetto, who so grossly belied his name, have you never made any effort to trace out whither he has gone, or what has become of him? No. Far from wishing to learn whither he has betaken himself, I should shun the possibility of meeting him as I would a wild beast. Thank God! I have never heard his name mentioned by any person, and I hope and believe he is dead. Do not think so, Bertuccio, replied the Count, for the wicked are not so easily disposed of, for God seems to have them under his special watch care to make them instruments of his vengeance. So be it, responded Bertuccio. All I ask of heaven is that I may never see him again. And now, your Excellency, he added, bowing his head, you know everything. You are my judge on earth, as the Almighty is in heaven. Have you for me no words of consolation? My good friend, I can only repeat the words addressed to you by the Abbé Busoni. Villefort merited punishment for what he had done to you, and perhaps to others. Benedetto, if still living, will become the instrument of divine retribution in some way or other, and then be duly punished in his turn. As far as you yourself are concerned, I see but one point in which you are really guilty. Ask yourself, wherefore, after rescuing the infant from its living grave, you did not restore it to its mother? There was the crime, Bertuccio, that was where you became really culpable. True, Excellency, that was a crime, the real crime, for in that I acted like a coward. My first duty, directly I had succeeded in recalling the babe to life, was to restore it to its mother. But in order to do so, I must have made close and careful inquiry, which would, in all probability, have led to my own apprehension, and I clung to life partly on my sister's account and partly from that feeling of pride inborn in our hearts, a desire to come off untouched and victorious in the execution of our vengeance. Perhaps, too, the natural and instinctive love of life made me wish to avoid endangering my own. And then again, I am not as brave and courageous as was my poor brother. Bertuccio hid his face in his hands as he uttered these words, while Monte Cristo fixed on him a look of inscrutable meaning. After a brief silence, rendered still more solemn by the time and place, the Count said, in a tone of melancholy wholly unlike his usual manner, "In order to bring this conversation to a fitting termination, the last we shall ever hold upon this subject, I will repeat to you some words I have heard from the lips of the Abbé Busoni. For all evils there are two remedies, time and silence. And now leave me, Monsieur Bertuccio, to walk alone here in the garden. The very circumstances which inflict on you, as a principal in a tragic scene enacted here, such painful emotions, are to me, on the contrary, a source of something like contentment, and serve but to enhance the value of this dwelling in my estimation. The chief beauty of trees consists in the deep shadow of their umbrageous boughs, while fancy pictures a moving multitude of shapes and forms flitting and passing beneath that shade. Here I have a garden laid out in such a way as to afford the fullest scope for the imagination, and furnished with thickly grown trees, beneath whose leafy screen a visionary like myself may conjure up phantoms at will. This to me, who expected but to find a blank enclosure surrounded by a straight wall, is, I assure you, a most agreeable surprise. I have no fear of ghosts, and I have never heard it said that so much harm had been done by the dead during 6,000 years as is wrought by the living in a single day. Retire within, Bertuccio, and tranquilize your mind. Should your confessor be less indulgent to you in your dying moments than you found the Abbé Busoni, send for me, if I am still on earth, and I will soothe your ears with words that shall effectually calm and soothe your parting soul ere it goes forth to traverse the ocean called eternity." Bertuccio bowed respectfully and turned away, sighing heavily. Monte Cristo, left alone, took 3 or 4 steps onwards and murmured, "Here, beneath this plane tree, must have been where the infant's grave was dug. There's the little door opening into the garden. At this corner is the private staircase communicating with the sleeping apartment. There will be no necessity for me to make a note of these particulars, for there, before my eyes, beneath my feet, all around me, I have the plan sketched with all the living reality of truth." After making the tour of the garden a second time, the Count re-entered his carriage, while Bertuccio, who perceived the thoughtful expression of his master's features, took his seat beside the driver without uttering a word. The carriage proceeded rapidly towards Paris. That same evening, upon reaching his abode in the Champs-Élysées, the Count of Monte Cristo went over the whole building with the air of one long acquainted with each nook or corner. Nor, although preceding the party, did he once mistake one door for another, or commit the smallest error when choosing any particular corridor or staircase to conduct him to a place or suite of rooms he desired to visit. Ali was his principal attendant during this nocturnal survey. Having given various orders to Bertuccio relative to the improvements and alterations he desired to make in the house, the Count, drawing out his watch, said to the attentive Nubian, "It is 11:30 o'clock. Haydée will soon be here. Have the French attendants been summoned to await her coming?" Ali extended his hands towards the apartments destined for the fair Greek, which were so effectually concealed by means of a tapestried entrance that it would have puzzled the most curious to have divined their existence. Ali, having pointed to the apartments, held up 3 fingers of his right hand, and then, placing it beneath his head, shut his eyes and feigned to sleep. "I understand," said Monte Cristo, well acquainted with Ali's pantomime. "You mean to tell me that 3 female attendants await their new mistress in her sleeping chamber?" Ali, with considerable animation, made a sign in the affirmative. "Madame will be tired tonight," continued Monte Cristo, "and will, no doubt, wish to rest. Desire the French attendants not to weary her with questions, but merely to pay their respectful duty and retire. You will also see that the Greek servants hold no communication with those of this country." He bowed. Just at that moment voices were heard hailing the concierge. The gate opened, a carriage rolled down the avenue, and stopped at the steps. The Count hastily descended, presented himself at the already open carriage door, and held out his hand to a young woman, completely enveloped in a green silk mantle heavily embroidered with gold. She raised a hand extended towards her lips and kissed it with a mixture of love and respect. Some few words passed between them in that sonorous language in which Homer makes his gods converse. The young woman spoke with an expression of deep tenderness, while the Count replied with an air of gentle gravity, preceded by Ollie, who carried a rose-colored flambeau in his hand. The young lady, who was no other than the lovely Greek who had been Monte Cristo's companion in Italy, was conducted to her apartments, while the Count retired to the pavilion reserved for himself. In another hour, every light in the house was extinguished, and it might have been thought that all its inmates slept. Chapter 46. Unlimited Credit. About 2 o'clock the following day, a calash, drawn by a pair of magnificent English horses, stopped at the door of Monte Cristo in a person, dressed in a blue coat, with buttons of a similar color, a white waistcoat, over which was displayed a massive gold chain, brown trousers, and a quantity of black hair descending so low over his eyebrows as to leave it doubtful whether it were not artificial. So little did its jetty glossiness assimilate with the deep wrinkles stamped on his features. A person, in a word, who, although evidently past 50, desired to be taken for not more than 40, bent forwards from the carriage door, on the panels of which were emblazoned the armorial bearings of Baron, and directed his groom to inquire at the porter's lodge whether the Count of Monte Cristo resided there, and if he were within. While waiting, the occupant of the carriage surveyed the house, the garden as far as he could distinguish it, and the livery of servants who passed to and fro, with an attention so close as to be somewhat impertinent. His glance was keen, but showed cunning rather than intelligence. His lips were straight and so thin that, as they closed, they were drawn in over the teeth. His cheekbones were broad and projecting, a never-failing proof of audacity and craftiness, while the flatness of his forehead and the enlargement of the back of his skull, which rose much higher than his large and coarsely shaped ears, combined to form a physiognomy anything but prepossessing, save in the eyes of such as considered that the owner of so splendid an equipage must needs be all that was admirable and enviable, more especially when he gazed on the enormous diamond that glittered in his shirt and the red ribbon that depended from his buttonhole. The groom, in obedience to his orders, tapped at the window of the porter's lodge, saying, "Pray, does not the Count of Monte Cristo live here?" "His Excellency does reside here," replied the concierge, "but," added he, glancing an inquiring look at Ollie. Ollie returned a sign in the negative. "But what?" asked the groom. "His Excellency does not receive visitors today." "Then here is my master's card, the Baron Danglars. You will take it to the Count and say that, although in haste to attend the chamber, my master came out his way to have the honor of calling upon him." "I never speak to His Excellency," replied the concierge. "The valet de chambre will carry your message." The groom returned the carriage. "Well," asked Danglars. The man, somewhat crestfallen by the rebuke he had received, repeated what the concierge had said. "Bless me," murmured Baron Danglars. "This must surely be a prince instead of a count by their styling him Excellency, and only venturing to address him by the medium of his valet de chambre. However, it does not signify. He has a letter of credit on me, so I must see him when he requires his money." Then, throwing himself back in his carriage, Danglars called out to his coachman, in a voice that might be heard across the road, "To the Chamber of Deputies." A prize in time of the visit paid him. Monte Cristo had, from behind the blinds of his pavilion, as minutely observed the Baron, by means of an excellent lorgnette, as Danglars himself had scrutinized the house, garden, and servants. "That fellow has a decidedly bad countenance," said the Count in a tone of disgust, as he shut up his glass into its ivory case. "How comes it that all do not retreat in aversion at sight of that flat, receding, serpent-like forehead, round, vulture-shaped head, and sharp-hooked nose, like the beak of a buzzard? Ollie!" cried he, striking at the same time on the brazen gong. Ollie appeared. "Summon Bertuccio," said the Count. Almost immediately Bertuccio entered the apartment. "Did your Excellency desire to see me?" inquired he. "I did," replied the Count. "You no doubt observed the horses standing a few minutes since at the door?" "Certainly, your Excellency. I noticed them for their remarkable beauty." "Then how comes it," said Monte Cristo with a frown, "that when I desired you to purchase for me the finest pair of horses to be found in Paris, there's another pair, fully as fine as mine, not in my stables?" At the look of displeasure, added the angry tone in which the Count spoke, Ali turned pale and held down his head. "It is not your fault, my good Ali," said the Count in the Arabic language, and with a gentleness none would have thought him capable of showing, either in voice or face. "It is not your fault. You do not understand the points of English horses." The countenance of poor Ali recovered its serenity. "Permit me to assure your Excellency," said Bertuccio, "that the horses you speak of were not to be sold when I purchased yours." Monte Cristo shrugged his shoulders. "It seems, Sir Steward," said he, "that you have yet to learn that all things are to be sold to such as care to pay the price. His Excellency is not, perhaps, aware that M. Danglars gave 16,000 francs for his horses? Very well, then offer him double that sum. A banker never loses an opportunity of doubling his capital." "Is your Excellency really in earnest?" inquired the steward. Monte Cristo regarded the person who durst presume to doubt his words with the look of one equally surprised and displeased. "I have to pay a visit this evening," replied he. "I desire that these horses, with completely new harness, may be at the door with my carriage." Bertuccio bowed and was about to retire, but when he reached the door he paused and then said, "At what o'clock does your Excellency wish the carriage and horses to be ready?" "At 5 o'clock," replied the Count. "I beg your Excellency's pardon," interposed the steward in a deprecating manner, "for venturing to observe that it is already 2 o'clock." "I am perfectly aware of that fact," answered Monte Cristo calmly. Then, turning towards Ali, he said, "Let all the horses in my stables be led before the windows of your young lady, that she may select those she prefers for her carriage. Request her also to oblige me by saying whether it is her pleasure to dine with me. If so, let dinner be served in her apartments. Now leave me, and desire my valet de chambre to come hither." Scarcely had Ali disappeared when the valet entered the chamber. "Monsieur Baptistin," said the Count, "you have been in my service 1 year, the time I generally give myself to judge of the merits or demerits of those about me. You suit me very well." Baptistin bowed low. "It only remains for me to know whether I also suit you." "Oh, your Excellency!" exclaimed Baptistin eagerly. "Listen, if you please, till I have finished speaking," replied Monte Cristo. "You receive 1,500 francs per annum for your services here, more than many a brave subaltern, who continually risks his life for his country, obtains. You live in a manner far superior to many clerks who work 10 times harder than you do for their money. Then, though yourself a servant, you have other servants to wait upon you. Take care of your clothes, and see that your linen is duly prepared for you. Again, you make a profit upon each article you purchase for my toilet, amounting in the course of a year to a sum equaling your wages. Nay, indeed, your Excellency, I am not condemning you for this, Monsieur Baptistin, but let your profits end here. It will be long indeed ere you would find so lucrative a post as that you have now the good fortune to fill. I neither ill-use nor ill-treat my servants by word or action. An error I readily forgive, but willful negligence or forgetfulness, never. My commands are ordinarily short, clear, and precise, and I would rather be obliged to repeat my words twice, or even 3 times, than they should be misunderstood. I am rich enough to know whatever I desire to know, and I can promise you I am not wanting in curiosity. If, then, I should learn that you had taken upon yourself to speak of me to anyone favorably or unfavorably, to comment on my actions or watch my conduct, that very instant you would quit my service. You may now retire. I never caution my servants a second time. Remember that." Baptistin bowed and was proceeding towards the door. "I forgot to mention to you," said the Count, "that I lay yearly aside a certain sum for each servant in my establishment. Those whom I am compelled to dismiss lose, as a matter of course, all participation in this money, while their portion goes to the fund accumulating for those domestics who remain with me, and among whom it will be divided at my death. You have been in my service a year. Your fund has already begun to accumulate. Let it continue to do so." This address, delivered in the presence of Ali, who, not understanding one word of the language in which it was spoken, stood wholly unmoved, produced an effect on M. Baptistin only to be conceived by such as have occasion to study the character and disposition of French domestics. "I assure your Excellency," said he, "that at least it shall be my study to merit your approbation in all things, and I will take M. Ollie as my model. By no means, replied the Count in the most frigid tones. Ollie has many faults mixed with most excellent qualities. He cannot possibly serve you as a pattern for your conduct, not being, as you are, a paid servant, but a mere slave, a dog, who, should he fail in his duty toward me, I should not discharge in my service, but kill. Baptistin opened his eyes with astonishment. You seem incredulous, said Monte Cristo, who repeated to Ollie in the Arabic language what he had just been saying to Baptistin in French. The Nubian smiled assentingly to his master's words, then, kneeling on one knee, respectfully kissed the hand of the Count. This corroboration of the lesson he had just received put the finishing stroke to the wonder and stupefaction of M. Baptistin. The Count then motioned the valet de chambre to retire, and Ollie to follow to his study, where they conversed long and earnestly together. As the hand of the clock pointed to 5, the Count struck thrice upon his gong. When Ollie was wanted, 1 stroke was given, 2 summoned Baptistin, and 3 Bertuccio. The steward entered. My horses, said Monte Cristo. They are at the door harnessed to the carriage, as your excellency desired. Does your excellency wish me to accompany him? No. The coachman, Ollie, and Baptistin will go. The Count descended to the door of his mansion, and beheld his carriage drawn by the very pair of horses he had so much admired in the morning as the property of Danglars. As he passed them, he said, They are extremely handsome, certainly, and you have done well to purchase them, although you were somewhat remiss not to have procured them sooner. Indeed, your excellency, I had very considerable difficulty in obtaining them, and as it is, they have cost an enormous price. Does the sum you gave to make the animals less beautiful? Inquired the Count, shrugging his shoulders. Nay, if your excellency is satisfied, it is all that I could wish. Whither does your excellency desire to be driven? To the residence of Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin. This conversation had passed as they stood upon the terrace, from which a flight of stone steps led to the carriage drive. As Bertuccio, with a respectful bow, was moving away, the Count called him back. I have another commission for you, M. Bertuccio, said he. I am desirous of having an estate by the seaside in Normandy, for instance, between Le Havre and Boulogne. You see, I give you a wide range. It will be absolutely necessary that the place you may select have a small harbor, creek, or bay, into which my corvette can enter and remain at anchor. She draws only 15 feet. She must be kept in constant readiness to sail immediately. I think proper to give the signal, make the requisite inquiries for a place of this description, and when you're met with an eligible spot, visit it, and if it possess the advantages desired, purchase it at once in your own name. The corvette must now, I think, be on her way to Fécamp, must she not? Certainly, your excellency. I saw her put to sea the same evening we quitted Marseilles. And the yacht was ordered to remain at Martigues. 'Tis well. I wish you to write from time to the captains in charge of the 2 vessels, so as to keep them on the alert. And the steamboat, she is at Chalons? Yes. The same orders for her as for the 2 sailing vessels. Very good. When you have purchased the estate I desire, I want constant relays of horses at 10 leagues apart along the northern and southern road. Your excellency may depend upon me. The Count made a gesture of satisfaction, descended the terrace steps, and sprang into his carriage, which was whirled along swiftly to the banker's house. Danglars was engaged at that moment, presiding over a railroad committee, but the meeting was nearly concluded when the name of his visitor was announced. As the Count's title sounded on his ear, he rose, and addressing his colleagues, who were members of one or the other chamber, he said, Gentlemen, pardon me for leaving you so abruptly, but a most ridiculous circumstance has occurred, which is this. Thomson and Damp, French, the Roman bankers, have sent to me a certain person calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and have given him an unlimited credit with me. I confess this is the drollest thing I have ever met with in the course of my extensive foreign transactions, and you may readily suppose it has greatly roused my curiosity. I took the trouble this morning to call on the pretended Count. If he were a real Count, he wouldn't be so rich. But would you believe it? He was not receiving. So the master of Monte Cristo gives himself airs befitting a great millionaire or a capricious beauty. I made inquiries, and found that the house in the Champs-Élysées is his own property, and certainly it was very decently kept up. But, pursued Danglars with one of his sinister smiles, an order for unlimited credit calls for something like caution on the part of the banker to whom that order is given. I am very anxious to see this man. I suspect a hoax is intended, but the instigators of it little knew whom they had to deal with. They laughed best who laugh last. Having delivered himself of this pompous address, uttered with a degree of energy that left the Baron almost out of breath, he bowed to the assembled party and withdrew to his drawing room, whose sumptuous furnishings of white and gold had caused a great sensation in the Chaussée d'Antin. It was to this apartment he had desired his guest to be shown, with the purpose of overwhelming him at the sight of so much luxury. He found the Count standing before some copies of Albano and Fator that had been passed off to the banker as originals, but which, mere copies as they were, seemed to feel their degradation in being brought into juxtaposition with the gaudy colors that covered the ceiling. The Count turned round as he heard the entrance of Danglars into the room. With a slight inclination of the head, Danglars signed to the Count to be seated, pointing significantly to a gilded armchair covered with white satin embroidered with gold. The Count sat down. "I have the honor, I presume, of addressing M. de Monte Cristo." The Count bowed. "And I of speaking to Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor and member of the Chamber of Deputies?" Monte Cristo repeated all the titles he had read on the Baron's card. Danglars felt the irony and compressed his lips. "You will, I trust, excuse me, monsieur, for not calling you by your title when I first addressed you," he said, "but you are aware that we are living under a popular form of government, and that I am myself a representative of the liberties of the people." "So much so," replied Monte Cristo, "that while you call yourself Baron, you are not willing to call anybody else Count." "Upon my word, monsieur," said Danglars with affected carelessness, "I attach no sort of value to such empty distinctions. But the fact is, I was made Baron, and also Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, in return for services rendered, but you have discarded your titles after the example set you by Messrs. de Montmorency and Lafayette? That was a noble example to follow, monsieur." "Why?" replied Danglars. "Not entirely so, with the servants. You understand." "I see. To your domestics you are my lord. The journalists style you monsieur, while your constituents call you citizen. These are distinctions very suitable under a constitutional government. I understand perfectly." Again Danglars bit his lips. He saw that he was no match for Monte Cristo in an argument of this sort, and he therefore hastened to turn to subjects more congenial. "Permit me to inform you, Count," said he, bowing, "that I have received a letter of advice from Thomson and Amp, French, of Rome. I am glad to hear it, Baron, for I must claim the privilege of addressing you after the manner of your servants. I have acquired the bad habit of calling persons by their titles from living in a country where barons are still barons by right of birth. But as regards a letter of advice, I am charmed to find that it has reached you. That will spare me the troublesome and disagreeable task of coming to you for money myself. You have received a regular letter of advice." "Yes," said Danglars, "but I confess I didn't quite comprehend its meaning." "Indeed." "And for that reason I did myself the honor of calling upon you, in order to beg for an explanation." "Go on, monsieur. Here I am, ready to give you any explanation you desire." "Why?" said Danglars. "In the letter, I believe I have it about me." Here he felt in his breast pocket. "Yes, here it is. Well, this letter gives the Count of Monte Cristo unlimited credit on our house." "Well, Baron, what is there difficult to understand about that?" "Merely the term unlimited, nothing else, certainly." "Is not that word known in France? The people who wrote are Anglo-Germans, you know." "Oh, as for the composition of the letter, there is nothing to be said, but as regards the competency of the document, I certainly have doubts." "Is it possible," asked the Count, assuming all air and tone of the utmost simplicity and candor, "is it possible that Thomson and Amp, French, are not looked upon as safe and solvent bankers? Pray tell me what you think, Baron, for I feel uneasy, I can assure you, having some considerable property in their hands." "Thomson and Amp, French are perfectly solvent," replied Danglars, with an almost mocking smile, "but the word unlimited in financial affairs is so extremely vague." "Is In fact, unlimited, said Monte Cristo. Precisely what I was about to say, cried Danglars. Now, what is vague is doubtful. And it was a wise man who said, when in doubt, keep out. Meaning to say, rejoined Monte Cristo, that however Thomson and Damp, French may be inclined to commit act of imprudence and folly, the Baron Danglars is not disposed to follow their example. Not at all. Plainly enough, Messrs. Thomson and Damp, French set no bounds to their engagements, while those of M. Danglars have their limits. He is a wise man, according to his own showing. Monsieur, replied the banker, drawing himself up with a haughty air, the extent of my resources has never yet been questioned. It seems, then, reserved for me, said Monte Cristo coldly, to be the first to do so. By what right, sir? By right of the objections you have raised, and the explanations you have demanded, which certainly must have some motive. Once more Danglars bit his lips. It was the second time he had been worsted, and this time on his own ground. His forced politeness sat awkwardly upon him, and approached almost impertinence. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, preserved a graceful suavity of demeanor. Aided by a certain degree of simplicity, he could assume at pleasure, and thus possess the advantage. Well, sir, resumed Danglars, after a brief silence, I will endeavor to make myself understood by requesting you to inform me for what sum you propose to draw upon me. Why, truly, replied Monte Cristo, determined not to lose an inch of the ground he had gained, my reason for desiring an unlimited credit was precisely because I did not know how much money I might need. The banker thought the time had come for him to take the upper hand. So throwing himself back in his armchair, he said, with an arrogant and purse-proud air, let me beg of you not to hesitate in naming your wishes. You will then be convinced that the resources of the house of Danglars, however limited, are still equal to meeting the largest demands. And were you even to require $1,000,000? I beg your pardon, interposed Monte Cristo. I said $1,000,000, replied Danglars, with the confidence of ignorance. But could I do with $1,000,000? Retorted the Count. My dear sir, if a trifle like that could suffice me, I should never have given myself the trouble of opening an account. $1,000,000? Excuse my smiling when you speak of a sum I am in the habit of carrying in my pocketbook or dressing case. And with these words, Monte Cristo took from his pocket a small case containing his visiting cards, and drew forth 2 orders on the treasury for 500,000 francs each, payable at sight to the bearer. A man like Danglars was wholly inaccessible to any gentler method of correction. The effect of the present revelation was stunning. He trembled and was on the verge of apoplexy. The pupils of his eyes, as he gazed at Monte Cristo, dilated horribly. Come, said Monte Cristo, confess honestly that you have not perfect confidence in Thomson and Amp, French. I understand, and foreseeing that such might be the case, I took, in spite of my ignorance of affairs, certain precautions. See, here are 2 similar letters so that you have yourself received, one from the house of Arstein and Amp, Escos of Vienna, to Baron Rothschild, the other drawn by Baring of London upon M. Lafitte. Now, sir, you have but to say the word, and I will spare you all uneasiness by presenting my letter of credit to one or other of these 2 firms. The blow had struck home, and Danglars was entirely vanquished. With a trembling hand, he took the 2 letters from the Count, who held them carelessly between finger and thumb, and proceeded to scrutinize the signatures, with a minuteness that the Count might have regarded as insulting, had it not suited his present purpose to mislead the banker. Oh, sir, said Danglars, after he had convinced himself of the authenticity of the documents he held, and rising as if to salute the power of gold personified in the man before him, 3 letters of unlimited credit. I can be no longer mistrustful, but you must pardon me, my dear Count, for confessing some degree of astonishment. Nay, answered Monte Cristo, with the most gentlemanly air, 'tis not for such trifling sums as these that your banking house is to be incommoded. Then you can let me have some money, can you not? Whatever you say, my dear Count, I am at your orders. Why, replied Monte Cristo, since we mutually understand each other, for such I presume is the case? Danglars bowed assentingly. You are quite sure that not a lurking doubt or suspicion lingers in your mind? Oh, my dear Count, exclaimed Danglars, I never for an instant entertained such a feeling towards you. No, You merely wish to be convinced, nothing more. But now that we've come to so clear an understanding, and that all distrust and suspicion are laid at rest, we may as well fix a sum as the probable expenditure the first year. Suppose we say 6 millions to. 6 millions, gasped Danglars. So be it. Then, if I should require more, continued Monte Cristo in a careless manner, why, of course, I should draw upon you. But my present intention is not to remain in France more than a year, and during that period I scarcely think I shall exceed the sum I mentioned. However, we shall see. Be kind enough, then, to send me 500,000 francs tomorrow. I shall be at home till midday, or if not, I will leave a receipt with my steward. The money you desire shall be at your house by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, my dear Count, replied Danglars. How would you like to have it? In gold, silver, or notes? Half in gold, and the other half in banknotes, if you please, said the Count, rising from his seat. I must confess to you, Count, said Danglars, that I have hitherto imagined myself acquainted with the degree of all the great fortunes of Europe, and still wealth such as yours has been wholly unknown to me. May I presume to ask whether you have long possessed it? It has been in the family a very long while, returned Monte Cristo, a sort of treasure expressly forbidden to be touched for a certain period of years, during which the accumulated interest has doubled the capital. The period appointed by the testator for the disposal of these riches occurred only a short time ago, and they have only been employed by me within the last few years. Your ignorance on the subject, therefore, is easily accounted for. However, you will be better informed as to me and my possessions ere long. And the Count, while pronouncing these latter words, accompanied them with one of those ghastly smiles that used to strike terror into poor Franz d'Épinay. With your tastes and means of gratifying them, continued Danglars, you will exhibit a splendor that must effectually put us poor miserable millionaires quite in the shade. If I mistake not, you are an admirer of paintings. At least I judge so from the attention you appear to be bestowing on mine when I entered the room. If you will permit me, I shall be happy to show you my picture gallery, composed entirely of works by the ancient masters, warranted as such, not a modern picture among them. I cannot endure the modern school of painting. You are perfectly right in objecting to them, for this one great fault, that they have not yet had time to become old. Or will you allow me to show you several fine statues by Thorvaldsen, Bartoloni, and Canova, all foreign artists, for, as you may perceive, I think but very indifferently of our French sculptors. You have a right to be unjust to them, monsieur. They are your compatriots. But all this may come later, when we shall be better known to each other. For the present, I will confine myself, if perfectly agreeable to you, to introducing you to the Baroness Danglars. Excuse my impatience, my dear Count, but a client like you is almost like a member of the family. Monte Cristo bowed, in sign that he accepted the proffered honor. Danglars rang and was answered by a servant in a showy livery. Is the Baroness at home? Inquired Danglars. Yes, my lord, answered the man. And alone? No, my lord, madam is visitors. Have you any objection to meet any persons who may be with madam? Or do you desire to preserve a strict incognito? No, indeed, replied Monte Cristo with a smile. I do not arrogate to myself the right of so doing. And who is with madam? M. Debray? Inquired Danglars, with an air of indulgence and good nature that made Monte Cristo smile, acquainted as he was with the secrets of the banker's domestic life. Yes, my lord, replied the servant. M. Debray is with madam. Danglars nodded his head. Then, turning to Monte Cristo, said, Lucien Debray is an old friend of ours and private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, I must tell you, she lowered herself by marrying me, for she belongs to one of the most ancient families in France. Her maiden name was de Servières, and her first husband was Colonel the Marquis of Nargonne. I have not the honor of knowing Madame Danglars, but I have already met M. Lucien Debray. Ah, indeed, said Danglars. And where was that? At the house of M. de Morcerf. Ah, you are acquainted with the young Viscount, are you? We were together a good deal during the carnival at Rome. True, true, cried Danglars. Let me see. Have I not heard talk of some strange adventure with bandits or thieves hid in ruins, and of his having had a miraculous escape? I forget how, but I know he used to amuse my wife and daughter by telling them about it after his return from Italy. Her ladyship is waiting to receive you, gentlemen, said the servant, who had gone to inquire the pleasure of his mistress. With your permission, said Danglars, bowing, I will precede you to show you the way. By all means, replied Monte Cristo. I follow you. Chapter 47. The Dappled Greys. The Baron, followed by the Count, traversed a long series of apartments in which the prevailing characteristics were heavy magnificence and the gaudiness of ostentatious wealth, until he reached the boudoir of Madame Danglars, a small octagonal-shaped room, hung with pink satin, covered with white Indian muslin. The chairs were of ancient workmanship and materials. Over the doors were painted sketches of shepherds and shepherdesses, after the style and manner of Boucher, and at each side pretty medallions in crayons, harmonizing well with the furnishings of this charming apartment, the only one throughout the great mansion in which any distinctive taste prevailed. The truth was, it had been entirely overlooked in the plan arranged and followed out by M. Danglars and his architect, who had been selected to aid the Baron in the great work of improvement solely because he was the most fashionable and celebrated decorator of the day. The decorations of the boudoir had then been left entirely to Madame Danglars and Lucien Debray. M. Danglars, however, while possessing a great admiration for the antique, as it was understood during the time of the Directory, entertained the most sovereign contempt for the simple elegance of his wife's favorite sitting room, where, by the way, he was never permitted to intrude, unless, indeed, he excused his own appearance by ushering in some more agreeable visitor than himself. And even then he had rather the air and manner of a person who was himself introduced than that of being the presenter of another, his reception being cordial or frigid, in proportion as the person who accompanied him chanced to please or displease the Baroness. Madame Danglars, who, although past the first bloom of youth, was still strikingly handsome, was now seated at the piano, a most elaborate piece of cabinet and inlaid work, while Lucien Debray, standing before a small work table, was turning over the pages of an album. Lucien had found time, preparatory to the Count's arrival, to relate many particulars respecting him to Madame Danglars. It will be remembered that Monte Cristo had made a lively impression on the minds of all the party assembled at the breakfast given by Albert de Morcerf, and although Debray was not in the habit of yielding to such feelings, he had never been able to shake off the powerful influence excited in his mind by the impressive look and manner of the Count. Consequently, the description given by Lucien to the Baroness bore the highly colored tinge of his own heated imagination. Already excited by the wonderful stories related to the Count by de Morcerf, it is no wonder that Madame Danglars eagerly listened to and fully credited all the additional circumstances detailed by Debray. This posing at the piano and over the album was only a little ruse adopted by way of precaution. A most gracious welcome and unusual smile were bestowed on M. Danglars. The Count, in return for his gentlemanly bow, received a formal though graceful courtesy, while Lucien exchanged with the Count a sort of distant recognition, and with Danglars a free and easy nod. "Baroness," said Danglars, "give me leave to present to you the Count of Monte Cristo, who has been most warmly recommended to me by my correspondents at Rome. I need but mention one fact to make all the ladies in Paris court his notice, and that is that he has come to take up his abode in Paris for a year, during which brief period he proposes to spend 6 millions of money. That means balls, dinners, and lawn parties without end, in all of which I trust the Count will remember us, as he may depend upon it we shall him, in our own humble entertainments." In spite of the gross flattery and coarseness of this address, Madame Danglars could not forbear gazing with considerable interest on a man capable of expending 6 millions in 12 months, and who had selected Paris as the scene of his princely extravagance. "And when did you arrive here?" inquired she. "Yesterday morning, madam. Coming, as usual, I presume, from the extreme end of the globe? Pardon me, at least, such I have heard is your custom." "Nay, madam, this time I have merely come from Cadiz." "You have selected a most unfavorable moment for your first visit. Paris is a horrible place in summer. Balls, parties, and fêtes are over. The Italian opera is in London. The French opera everywhere except in Paris. As for the Theatre Francais, you know, of course, that it is nowhere. The only amusements left us are the indifferent races at the Champ de Mars and Satyry. Do you propose entering any horses at either of these races, Count?" "I shall do whatever they do at Paris, madam, if I have the good fortune to find someone who will initiate me into the prevalent ideas of amusement. Are you fond of horses, Count?" I have passed a considerable part of my life in the East, madam, and you are doubtless aware that the Orientals value only two things, the fine breeding of their horses and the beauty of their women. Nay, Count, said the Baroness, it would have been somewhat more gallant to have placed the ladies first. You see, madam, how rightly I spoke when I said I required a preceptor to guide me in all my sayings and doings here. At this instant the favourite attendant of Madame Danglars entered the boudoir. Approaching her mistress, she spoke some words in an undertone. Madame Danglars turned very pale, then exclaimed, I cannot believe it. The thing is impossible. I assure you, madam, replied the woman, it is, as I have said. Turning impatiently towards her husband, Madame Danglars demanded, Is this true? Is what true, madam? Inquired Danglars, visibly agitated. What my maid tells me. But what does she tell you? That when my coachman was about to harness the horses to my carriage, he discovered that they had been removed from the stables without his knowledge. I desire to know what is the meaning of this. Be kind enough, madam, to listen to me, said Danglars. Oh, yes, I will listen, monsieur, for I am most curious to hear what explanation you will give. These two gentlemen shall decide between us. But first, I will state the case to them. Gentlemen, continued the Baroness, among the 10 horses in the stables of Baron Danglars are 2 that belong exclusively to me, a pair of the handsomest and most spirited creatures to be found in Paris. But to you, at least, M. Debray, I need not give a further description, because to you my beautiful pair of dapple greys were well known. Well, I had promised Madame de Villefort the loan of my carriage to drive tomorrow to the Bois, but when my coachman goes to fetch the greys from the stables, they are gone. Positively gone. No doubt, M. Danglars has sacrificed them to the selfish consideration of gaining some thousands of paltry francs. Oh, what a detestable crew they are, these mercenary speculators. Madam, replied Danglars, the horses were not sufficiently quiet for you. They were scarcely 4 years old, and they made me extremely uneasy on your account. Nonsense, retorted the Baroness. You could not have entertained any alarm on the subject, because you are perfectly well aware that I had for a month in my service the very best coachman in Paris. But perhaps you have disposed of the coachman as well as the horses? My dear love, pray do not say any more about them, and I promise you another pair exactly like them in appearance, only more quiet and steady. The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of ineffable contempt, while her husband, affecting not to observe this unconjugal gesture, turned towards Monte Cristo and said, Upon my word, Count, I am quite sorry not to have met you sooner. You are setting up an establishment, of course? Why, yes, replied the Count. I should have liked to have made you the offer of these horses. I have almost given them away, as it is. But, as I before said, I was anxious to get rid of them upon any terms. They were only fit for a young man. I am much obliged by your kind intentions towards me, said Monte Cristo. But this morning I purchased a very excellent pair of carriage horses, and I do not think they were dear. There they are. Come, M. Debray, you are a connoisseur. I believe, let me have your opinion upon them. As Debray walked toward the window, Danglars approached his wife. I could not tell you before others, said he in a low tone, the reason of my parting with the horses, but most enormous price was offered me this morning for them. Some madman or fool, bent upon ruining himself as fast as he can, actually sent his steward to me to purchase them at any cost. And the fact is, I have gained 16,000 francs by the sale of them. Come, don't look so angry, and you shall have 4,000 francs of the money to do what you like with, and Eugenie shall have 2,000. There, what do you think now of the affair? Wasn't I right to part with the horses? Madame Danglars surveyed her husband with a look of withering contempt. Great heavens! Suddenly exclaimed Debray. What is it? Asked the Baroness. I cannot be mistaken. There are your horses, the very animals we were speaking of, harnessed to the Count's carriage. My dapple greys? Demanded the Baroness, springing to the window. 'Tis indeed they, said she. Danglars looked absolutely stupefied. How very singular, cried Monte Cristo with well-feigned astonishment. I cannot believe it, murmured the banker. Madame Danglars whispered a few words in the ear of Debray, who approached Monte Cristo, saying, The Baroness wishes to know what you paid her husband for the horses." "I scarcely know," replied the Count. "It was a little surprise prepared for me by my steward, and cost me, well, somewhere about 30,000 francs. Debray conveyed the Count's reply to the Baroness. Poor Danglars looked so crestfallen and discomfited that Monte Cristo assumed a pitying air towards him. "See," said the Count, "how very ungrateful women are. Your kind attention, in providing for the safety of the Baroness by disposing of the horses, does not seem to have made the least impression on her. But so it is, a woman will often, from mere willfulness, prefer that which is dangerous to that which is safe. Therefore, in my opinion, my dear Baron, the best and easiest way is to leave them to their fancies, and allow them to act as they please, and then if any mischief follows, why, at least, they have no one to blame but themselves." Danglars made no reply. He was occupied in anticipations of the coming scene between himself and the Baroness, whose frowning brow, like that of Olympic Jove, predicted a storm. Debray, who perceived the gathering clouds and felt no desire to witness the explosion of Madame Danglars' rage, suddenly recollected an appointment which compelled him to take his leave, while Monte Cristo, unwilling by prolonging his stay to destroy the advantages he hoped to obtain, made a farewell bow and departed, leaving Danglars to endure the angry reproaches of his wife. "Excellent," murmured Monte Cristo to himself as he came away. "All has gone according to my wishes. The domestic peace of this family is henceforth in my hands. Now then, to play another masterstroke, by which I shall gain the heart of both husband and wife. Delightful. Still," added he, "amid all this, I have not yet been presented to Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, whose acquaintance I should have been glad to make. But," he went on with his peculiar smile, "I am here in Paris, and have plenty of time before me. By and by will do for that." With these reflections, he entered his carriage and returned home. 2 hours afterwards, Madame Danglars received a most flattering epistle from the Count, in which he entreated her to receive back her favorite dapple grays, protesting that he could not endure the idea of making his entry into the Parisian world of fashion with the knowledge that his splendid equipage had been obtained at the price of a lovely woman's regrets. The horses were sent back wearing the same harness she had seen on them in the morning, only, by the Count's orders, in the center of each rosette that adorned either side of their heads, had been fastened a large diamond. To Danglars, Monte Cristo also wrote, requesting him to excuse the whimsical gift of a capricious millionaire, and to beg the Baroness to pardon the Eastern fashion adopted in the return of the horses. During the evening, Monte Cristo quitted Paris for Auteuil, accompanied by Ollie. The following day, about 3 o'clock, a single blow struck on the gong summoned Ollie to the presence of the Count. "Ollie," observed his master, as the Nubian entered the chamber, "you have frequently explained to me how more than commonly skillful you are in throwing the lasso, have you not?" Ollie drew himself up proudly, and then returned a sign in the affirmative. "I thought I did not mistake. With your lasso you could stop an ox." Again Ollie repeated his affirmative gesture. "Or a tiger?" Ollie bowed his head in token of assent. "A lion even?" Ollie sprung forwards, imitating the action of one throwing the lasso, then of a strangled lion. "I understand," said Monte Cristo. "You wish to tell me you have hunted the lion?" Ollie smiled with triumphant pride as he signified that he had indeed both chased and captured many lions. "But do you believe you could arrest the progress of 2 horses rushing forwards with ungovernable fury?" The Nubian smiled. "It is well," said Monte Cristo. "Then listen to me. Ere long a carriage will dash past here, drawn by the pair of dapple gray horses you saw me with yesterday. Now, at the risk of your own life, you must manage to stop those horses before my door." Ollie descended to the street and marked a straight line on the pavement immediately at the entrance of the house, and then pointed out the line he had traced to the Count, who was watching him. The Count patted him gently on the shoulder, his usual mode of praising Ollie, who, pleased and gratified with the commission assigned him, walked calmly towards a projecting stone forming the angle of the street and house, and, seating himself thereon, began to smoke his chibouque, while Monte Cristo re-entered his dwelling, perfectly assured of the success of his plan. Still, as 5 o'clock approached, and the carriage was momentarily expected by the Count, the indication of more than common impatience and uneasiness might be observed in his manner. He stationed himself in a room commanding a view of the street, pacing the chamber with restless steps, stopping merely to listen from time to time for the sound of approaching wheels, then to cast an anxious glance on Ollie. But the regularity with which the Nubian puffed forth the smoke of his chibouque proved that he at least was wholly absorbed in the enjoyment of his favorite occupation. Suddenly, a distant sound of rapidly advancing wheels was heard, and almost immediately a carriage appeared, drawn by a pair of wild, ungovernable horses, while the terrified coachman strove in vain to restrain their furious speed. In the vehicle was a young woman, and a child of about 7 or 8 clasped in each other's arms. Terror seemed to have deprived them even of the power of uttering a cry. The carriage creaked and rattled as it flew over the rough stones, and the slightest obstacle under the wheels would have caused disaster. But it kept on in the middle of the road, and those who saw it pass uttered cries of terror. Ollie suddenly cast aside his chibouque, drew the lasso from his pocket, threw it so skillfully as to catch the forelegs of the near horse in its triple fold, and suffered himself to be dragged on for a few steps by the violence of the shock. Then the animal fell over on the pole, which snapped and therefore prevented the other horse from pursuing its way. Gladly availing himself of this opportunity, the coachman leaped from his box, but Ollie had promptly seized the nostrils of the second horse and held him in his iron grasp till the beast, snorting with pain, sunk beside his companion. All this was achieved in much less time than is occupied in the recital. The brief space had, however, been sufficient for a man, followed by a number of servants, to rush from the house before which the accident had occurred, and, as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, to take from it a lady who was convulsively grasping the cushions with one hand, while with the other she pressed to her bosom the young boy, who had lost consciousness. Monte Cristo carried them both to the salon, and deposited them on a sofa. "Compose yourself, madam," said he. "All danger's over." The woman looked up at these words, and, with a glance far more expressive than any entreaties could have been, pointed to her child, who still continued insensible. "I understand the nature of your alarms, madam," said the Count, carefully examining the child, "but I assure you there is not the slightest occasion for uneasiness. Your little charge has not received the least injury. His insensibility is merely the effect of terror and will soon pass." "Are you quite sure you do not say so to tranquilize my fears? See how deadly pale he is. My child, my darling Edward, speak to your mother. Open your dear eyes and look on me once again. Oh, sir, in pity send for a physician. My whole fortune shall not be thought too much for recovery of my boy." With a calm smile and a gentle wave of the hand, Monte Cristo signed to the distracted mother to lay aside her apprehensions. Then, opening a casket that stood near, he drew forth a phial of Bohemian glass encrusted with gold, containing a liquid the color of blood, of which he let fall a single drop on the child's lips. Scarcely had it reached them, ere the boy, though still pale as marble, opened his eyes and eagerly gazed around him. At this, the delight of the mother was almost frantic. "Where am I?" exclaimed she, "and to whom am I indebted for so happy a termination to my late dreadful alarm?" "Madam," answered the Count, "you are under the roof of one who esteems himself most fortunate in having been able to save you from a further continuance of your sufferings." "My wretched curiosity has brought all this about," pursued the lady. "All Paris rung with the praises of Madame Danglars' beautiful horses, and I had the folly to desire to know whether they really merited the high praise given to them." "Is it possible," exclaimed the Count with well-feigned astonishment, "that these horses belong to the Baroness?" "They do, indeed. May I inquire if you are acquainted with Madame Danglars?" "I have that honor, and my happiness at your escape from the danger that threatened you is redoubled by the consciousness that I have been the unwilling and the unintentional cause of all the peril you have incurred. I yesterday purchased these horses of the Baron, but as the Baroness evidently regretted parting with them, I ventured to send them back to her, with a request that she would gratify me by accepting them from my hands. You are, then, doubtless, the Count of Monte Cristo, of whom Hermine has talked to me so much?" "You have rightly guessed, madam," replied the Count, "and I am Madame Heloise de Villefort." The Count bowed with the air of a person who hears a name for the first time. "How grateful will M. de Villefort be for all your goodness! How thankfully will he acknowledge that to you alone he owes the existence of his wife and child! Most certainly, but for the prompt assistance of your intrepid servant, this dear child and myself must both have perished. Indeed, I still shudder at the fearful danger you were placed in. I trust you will allow me to recompense worthily the devotion of your man. I beseech you, madam, replied Monte Cristo, not to spoil Ollie, either by too great praise or rewards. I cannot allow him to acquire the habit of expecting to be recompensed for every trifling service he may render. Ollie is my slave, and in saving your life he was but discharging his duty to me. Nay, interposed Madame de Villefort, on whom the authoritative style adopted by the Count made a deep impression. Nay, but consider that to preserve my life he has risked his own. His life, madam, belongs not to him. It is mine, in return for my having myself saved him from death. Madame de Villefort made no further reply. Her mind was utterly absorbed in the contemplation of the person who, from the first instant she saw him, had made so powerful an impression on her. During the evident preoccupation of Madame de Villefort, Monte Cristo scrutinized the features and appearance of the boy she kept folded in her arms, lavishing on him the most tender endearments. The child was small for his age and unnaturally pale, a mass of straight black hair, defying all attempt to train or curl it, fell over his projecting forehead, and hung down to his shoulders, giving increased vivacity to eyes already sparkling with youthful love of mischief and fondness for every forbidden enjoyment. His mouth was large, and the lips, which had not yet regained their color, were particularly thin. In fact, the deep and crafty look, giving predominant expression to the child's face, belonged rather to a boy of 12 or 14 than to one so young. His first movement was to free himself by a violent push from the encircling arms of his mother, and to rush forward to the casket from whence the Count had taken a phial of elixir. Then, without asking permission of anyone, he proceeded, in all the willfulness of a spoiled child unaccustomed to restrain either whims or caprices, to pull the corks out of all the bottles. "Touch nothing, my little friend," cried the Count eagerly. "Some of those liquids are not only dangerous to taste, but even inhale." Madame de Villefort became very pale, and, seizing her son's arm, drew him anxiously toward her. But, once satisfied of his safety, she also cast a brief but expressive glance on the casket, which was not lost upon the Count. At this moment Ollie entered. At sight of him, Madame de Villefort uttered an expression of pleasure, and, holding the child still closer toward her, she said, "Edward, dearest, do you see that good man? He has shown very great courage and resolution, for he exposed his own life to stop the horses that were running away with us, and would certainly have dashed the carriage to pieces. Thank him, then, my child, in your very best manner, for had he not come to our aid, neither you nor I would have been alive to speak our thanks." The child stuck out his lips and turned away his head in a disdainful manner, saying, "He's too ugly." The Count smiled as if the child bade fair to realize his hopes, while Madame de Villefort reprimanded her son with a gentleness and moderation very far from conveying the least idea of a fault having been committed. "This lady," said the Count, speaking to Ollie in the Arabic language, "is desirous that her son should thank you for saving both their lives. But the boy refuses, saying you are too ugly." Ollie turned his intelligent countenance toward the boy, on whom he gazed without any apparent emotion. But the spasmodic working of the nostrils showed the practiced eye of Monte Cristo that the Arab had been wounded to the heart. "Will you permit me to inquire," said Madame de Villefort, as she arose to take her leave, "whether you usually reside here?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo. "It is a small place I have purchased quite lately. My place of abode is number 30, Avenue de Champs-Élysées. But I see you have quite recovered from your fright, and are, no doubt, desirous of returning home. Anticipating your wishes, I have desired the same horses you came with to be put to one of my carriages, and Ollie, whom you think so very ugly," continued he, addressing the boy with a smiling air, "will have the honor of driving you home, while your coachman remains here to attend to the necessary repairs of your calash. As soon as that important business is concluded, I will have a pair of my own horses harnessed to convey it direct to Madame Danglars." "I dare not return with those dreadful horses," said Madame de Villefort. "You will see," replied Monte Cristo, "that they will be as different as possible in the hands of Ollie. With him they will be gentle and docile as lambs." Ollie had, indeed, given proof of this, for, approaching the animals, who had been got upon their legs with considerable difficulty. He rubbed their foreheads and nostrils with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, and wiped off the sweat and foam that covered their mouths. Then, commencing a loud whistling noise, he rubbed them well all over their bodies for several minutes. Then, undisturbed by the noisy crowd collected round the broken carriage, Ali quietly harnessed the pacified animals to the Count's chariot, took the reins in his hands, and mounted the box, when the utter astonishment of those who had witnessed the ungovernable spirit and maddened speed of the same horses, he was actually compelled to apply his whip in no very gentle manner before he could induce him to start. And even then all that could be obtained from the celebrated dappled greys, now changed into a couple of dull, sluggish, stupid brutes, was a slow, pottering pace, kept up with so much difficulty that Madame de Villefort was more than 2 hours returning to her residence in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Ali had, indeed, given proof of this, for, approaching the animals, who had been got upon their legs with considerable difficulty, he rubbed their foreheads and nostrils with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, and wiped off the sweat and foam that covered their mouths. Scarcely had the first congratulations upon her marvelous escape been gone through, when she wrote the following letter to Madame Danglars. Dear Hermine, I had just had a wonderful escape from the most imminent danger, and I owe my safety to the very Count of Monte Cristo we were talking about yesterday, but whom I little expected to see today. I remember how unmercifully I laughed at what I considered your eulogistic and exaggerated praises of him, but I have now ample cause to admit that your enthusiastic description of this wonderful man fell far short of his merits. Your horses got as far as Ranelagh, when they darted forward like mad things, and galloped away at so fearful a rate, that there seemed no other prospect for myself and my poor Edward but that of being dashed to pieces against the first object that impeded their progress, when a strange-looking man, an Arab, a Negro, or a Nubian, at least a black of some nation or other, at a signal from the Count, whose domestic he is, suddenly seized and stopped the infuriated animals, even at the risk of being trampled to death himself. And certainly he must have had a most wonderful escape. The Count then hastened to us, and took us into his house, where he speedily recalled my poor Edward to life. He sent us home in his own carriage. Yours will be returned to you tomorrow. You will find your horses in bad condition from the results of this accident. They seem thoroughly stupefied, as if sulky and vexed at having been conquered by man. The Count, however, has commissioned me to assure you that 2 or 3 days' rest, with plenty of barley for their sole food during that time, will bring them back to as fine, that is, as terrifying a condition as they were in yesterday. Adieu. I cannot return you many thanks for the drive of yesterday. But, after all, I ought not to blame you for the misconduct of your horses, more especially as it procured me the pleasure of an introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, and certainly that illustrious personage, apart from the millions he is said to be so very anxious to dispose of, seemed to me one of those curiously interesting problems I, for one, delight in solving at any risk, even if it were to necessitate another drive to the bois behind your horses. Edward endured the accident with miraculous courage. He did not utter a single cry, but fell lifeless into my arms. Nor did a tear fall from his eyes after it was over. I doubt not you will consider these praises a result of blind maternal affection, but there's a soul of iron in that delicate, fragile body. Valentine sends many affectionate remembrances to your dear Eugenie. I embrace you with all my heart. Heloise de Villefort. P.S. Do pray contrive some means for me to meet the Count of Monte Cristo at your house. I must and will see him again. I have just made M. de Villefort promise to call on him, and I hope the visit will be returned. That night the adventure at Château was talked of everywhere. Albert related it to his mother. Château recounted it at the Jockey Club, and Debray detailed at length in the salons of the minister. Even Beecham accorded 20 lines in his journal to the relation of the Count's courage and gallantry, thereby celebrating him as the greatest hero of the day in the eyes of all the feminine members of the aristocracy. Vast was the crowd of visitors and inquiring friends who left their names at the residence of Madame de Villefort, with the design of renewing their visit at the right moment, of hearing from her lips all the interesting circumstances of this most romantic adventure. As for M. de Villefort, he fulfilled the predictions of Heloise to the letter, donned his dress suit, drew on a pair of white gloves, ordered the servants to attend the carriage dressed in their full livery, and drove that same night to number 30 in the Avenue de Champs-Élysées.